A lowly creature like her dares touch my crystal glass." Omar al-Farid sneered in Arabic, making the dinner table erupt in laughter, certain the American waitress understood nothing. Sarah Collins bowed her head, her hand trembling as she set down the wine. But seconds later, she lifted her gaze and replied in flawless Arabic, "The crystal glass does not lower the one who holds it. It only reflects the dignity of the one who drinks from it." The entire hall froze. The billionaire who mocked her now stood stunned as the waitress spoke more fluently than a native. Sarah stood under the golden glow of the chandeliers in the six-star Dubai Hotel's dining hall, her plain black uniform fading into the shadows of marble walls and velvet drapes. She was 25, her brown hair tied back in a loose ponytail, a faint scar above her eyebrow catching the light. Her beauty was quiet, unpolished, like a pebble smoothed by a river, not the glittering kind that demanded attention. Raised in one of America's wealthiest families, adopted by a linguistics professor who taught her discipline and the power of words, Sarah carried herself with a restraint most mistook for weakness. But the guests here didn't see that. They only saw her scuffed shoes, the faint wear on her sleeves, the silence in her posture that told them she belonged in service, not in conversation. To them, she was invisible, until she spoke. Omar's jaw tightened. The laughter that had filled the air a moment ago curdled into a tense stillness. He leaned back in his chair, studying her like one studies an opponent across a chessboard. "You speak like one of us," he said in Arabic, his voice low, testing. "But you serve like one beneath us. Tell me, girl, who taught you our tongue?" Sarah did not flinch. She placed the crystal carafe on the table as though arranging pieces in her own game, her movements slow, steady, deliberate. Then she looked him directly in the eye. "Languages belong to no one," she replied softly, but the strength in her tone cut through the velvet hush. "They carry the weight of history, but also the freedom of those who master them." Across the table, a politician with a crooked tie gave a forced chuckle, trying to lighten the mood. "Impressive trick," he muttered in English, "like a parrot that learned a few fancy words." But Layla, Omar's daughter, did not laugh. Her dark eyes, framed by the subtle elegance of her gown, lingered on Sarah with quiet intensity. For the first time that evening, she leaned forward, her curiosity outweighing her role as a silent observer. There was something about this waitress, something that didn't fit the story everyone else in the room wanted to believe. The silence stretched like a tightrope across the hall. Forks hovered mid-air, glasses paused before lips. Every gaze in the room flicked between Omar al-Farid and the young waitress who had just unsettled him with nothing more than words. Sarah felt her pulse hammering in her throat, but she kept her face calm. She had learned long ago that stillness was its own kind of armor. Omar leaned forward now, resting his elbows on the polished mahogany table. His voice carried the weight of authority, deep and deliberate. "You speak with confidence, girl. But confidence can be borrowed. Tell me, do you understand the weight of the words you use, or do you only repeat what others have taught you?" Sarah held his stare. "Words are never borrowed," she said. "They are earned, through study, through struggle, through listening when others dismiss you." Her reply sent another ripple through the table. This time, no one laughed. The media mogul in the corner shifted uncomfortably, as though the balance of the evening had tilted. Clara, the jeweled socialite, let out a sharp scoff. "How quaint," she murmured, twirling her pearl necklace. "A servant with philosophy." But Layla's eyes softened. There was no mockery in them, only a flicker of respect that her father seemed not to notice. Omar exhaled, a slow breath that sounded like a warning. "You are clever," he admitted, his Arabic clipped, precise. "But cleverness can be dangerous, especially when it comes from someone who does not know her place." The chandelier light caught Sarah's scar as she stepped back from the table, lifting her chin ever so slightly. "Maybe the only danger," she said, "is when men mistake silence for ignorance." A hush fell again, heavier this time. The room was no longer watching a waitress. They were watching a duel, not of status or wealth, but of intellect. And for the first time in a long time, Omar al-Farid, the man who could silence ministers and magnates with a glance, found himself searching for the next move. The quiet crackled like static, fragile and dangerous. Omar's lips curled into something between a smile and a snarl. "You've got a tongue sharp enough to cut glass," he said in English now, ensuring everyone at the table understood. "But tell me, waitress, who sharpened it for you? Surely not the life you lead, scraping plates, pouring wine." The insult landed heavy, but Sarah didn't flinch. She had been underestimated too many times to let his words undo her. Instead, she took a breath, steady and sure. "My life," she said, still in flawless Arabic, though her eyes held his in defiance, "has taught me more than wealth ever could. You see privilege as strength. I see it as a shield for the weak." The words struck harder than she intended. A few guests gasped quietly. Others shifted uneasily in their velvet chairs. The politician at the far end of the table chuckled nervously, eager to break the tension. "Perhaps the girl should be at the podium instead of serving," he said, but his voice wavered with forced humor. Clara, her pearl necklace catching the chandelier's glow, leaned forward with mock sweetness. "Or perhaps she should be careful. Words like that can get a girl dismissed." Sarah caught the venom beneath her tone. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a warning. But before she could reply, a voice broke through the tension. "Father?" Every head turned. Layla, Omar's daughter, had spoken for the first time that night. Her tone was calm, but carried weight, like a blade concealed beneath silk. "This is not the desert, and this is not a duel," Layla continued in Arabic. "It is dinner. Perhaps the glass has already reflected more dignity than those seated at the table." A stunned silence followed. For the first time, Omar's composure cracked, not from the waitress, but from his own daughter's open defiance. Sarah met Layla's gaze across the table. For the briefest second, something unspoken passed between them. Respect, recognition, and maybe even a fragile alliance. But Omar's jaw tightened. The air seemed to thicken as he leaned back in his chair, folding his hands slowly, a king retreating only to strike harder later. The game had changed, and Sarah knew in her bones this was only the beginning. The weight of Layla's words still lingered in the air, heavier than the chandeliers overhead. A daughter, contradicting her father in front of the most powerful men and women in the Gulf, was not just bold, it was dangerous. Omar's eyes narrowed, the flicker of pride in his daughter's spirit drowned quickly by something darker. Humiliation. For a man like him, pride was currency, and Sarah had already stolen some of it. Now Layla had chipped away more. He raised his glass slowly, deliberately, the movement commanding everyone's attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," Omar said in English, his accent rolling like thunder across the room, "tonight was meant to be a gathering of friends. Deals, laughter, good wine. Yet it seems fate has decided to give us entertainment instead." The guests chuckled, relieved at the attempt to shift the tone, but Sarah felt the sting beneath his words. Entertainment. That's what she was to him. A spectacle. Omar gestured lazily toward Sarah. "Tell us, waitress, if you are so wise, so fluent, so untamed with your tongue, what else can you do besides carry trays?" A few of the men laughed, eager to be on his side. The politician smirked. Clara leaned forward, eyes gleaming, savoring the cruelty about to unfold. Sarah held her tray closer to her chest. She knew the trap. If she said nothing, she looked weak. If she answered, she risked making herself a target. But silence had never saved her mother's hospital bills. Silence had never stopped the rejection letters from insurance companies. Silence had never given her the strength to keep going. So Sarah straightened. "What would you like me to do, sir?" she asked, her voice steady. The room shifted, some curious, some amused. Omar leaned forward, his dark eyes studying her like a predator circling prey. "You speak Arabic like a scholar," he said. "Prove it. Recite a verse of the Quran, or perhaps a poem. Show us that your tongue is not just a parlor trick." A hush fell over the hall. Even Layla's posture stiffened. This wasn't a simple challenge. It was a test of respect, culture, and worthiness. One wrong word and Sarah would not just embarrass herself, she would insult the very heritage Omar was daring her to touch. Sarah's throat tightened, but then she remembered. Her adoptive father, Professor Collins, had raised her with languages the way other children were raised with bedtime stories. He had taught her not just words, but their weight, their soul. She remembered late nights at the kitchen table, Arabic books spread before them, her small voice repeating verses while his hand guided hers over the page. She closed her eyes briefly, inhaled, and began. Inna ma'al usri yusra. Inna ma'al usri yusra. Indeed, with hardship comes ease. Indeed, with hardship comes ease. Her voice was soft at first, then stronger, echoing against the marble walls. The cadence was perfect, the pronunciation flawless, the tone reverent. The effect was instant. The hall, filled with cynicism and mockery minutes before, now sat in reverent silence. Even those who barely practiced faith felt the weight of the words in her mouth. When she finished, Sarah lowered her gaze, not in submission, but in respect. Omar did not move. His jaw was stone, his hands still on the table. For the first time that evening, his mask had cracked in a way no one could mistake. This was not amusement. This was personal. Layla's lips parted, her eyes shimmering. She whispered almost inaudibly, "Subhanallah." But Clara, the socialite with her pearls, clapped her hands lightly. "How charming," she said in English, her voice dripping with condescension. "A waitress who moonlights as a preacher." Laughter trickled nervously from a few guests, but not all. Some remained quiet, uncomfortable, as if mocking what they'd just heard would bring misfortune upon them. Sarah stepped back, clutching her tray tighter. The verse echoed in her chest, steadying her heartbeat. She had not meant to challenge them, only to survive. But somehow, she had done both. Omar leaned forward, finally speaking, his voice low, deliberate, dangerous. "Do you know what you've done, girl?" Sarah met his gaze. "I spoke the truth." His eyes darkened. "No, you've embarrassed me. And in my house, under my roof, no one embarrasses me." The room froze. The challenge was no longer a game. It was war. The air in the dining hall had shifted. No longer light with laughter, no longer perfumed with the casual cruelty of the wealthy. It was heavy now, oppressive, as though the golden chandeliers themselves leaned down to watch what would happen next. Omar Al-Farid's voice carried like a blade sliding free of its sheath. "Embarrassment is not forgiven easily," he said. His hand brushed across the surface of the table, stopping at the stem of his untouched wineglass. He tapped it once, and the faint ting rang like a warning bell. "Tell me, waitress," he continued, switching to English now so that every foreign guest understood. "Do you know who sits at this table? A minister, a sheikh, a man whose company builds towers that scrape the clouds, and a woman who has dined with presidents. Do you know what this table represents?" Sarah swallowed. "Power," she said simply. Murmurs rose, some amused, others intrigued. Omar's lips curled. "Yes, power. And what are you in comparison to that? Her knuckles whitened around the tray. A waitress. Exactly. He slammed the glass back onto the table, making it ring. Yet a waitress just dared to put herself above me, above my bloodline, above my name. The silence was unbearable. Some guests looked away, unwilling to be caught in Omar's fury. Clara smirked, delighted at the unraveling. Layla's jaw clenched, her eyes darting between her father and Sarah as though she might intervene, but knew her place too well. Sarah's heart pounded. She wanted to shrink, to vanish into the polished marble floor. But another voice inside, the one her father had drilled into her since childhood, reminded her, "Words are weapons. Choose them wisely, and you can cut deeper than any blade." So she steadied her breath and said softly, "I did not put myself above you, sir. You placed yourself beneath your own pride." Gasps rippled through the hall. One of the ministers actually dropped his fork, the silver clattering against fine china. Clara's lips parted in mock horror, though her eyes glittered with glee. Omar froze. For a moment, the mighty man seemed almost inhuman, his face carved of stone, his eyes two burning coals. Then he laughed. Slowly, darkly. "Clever girl," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Very clever. Perhaps too clever for your own good." He raised his hand and snapped his fingers. A man in a black suit appeared almost instantly, as though he had been waiting for the signal. Broad-shouldered, expressionless, he stepped to Omar's side. Sarah's breath caught. This wasn't just a butler. This was security. The entire hall tensed. No one spoke. No one dared interfere. "Shall we see how far this clever tongue goes?" Omar asked, his voice deceptively calm. He gestured to the security guard. "Bring her forward." The man stepped toward Sarah. Her pulse roared in her ears. She wanted to flee, but her feet stayed planted. Running would mean defeat, humiliation, perhaps worse. So she stood her ground as the guard gently but firmly took the tray from her hands and guided her toward the head of the table. Every step felt like crossing a battlefield with no armor. The weight of dozens of stares burned into her skin, some pitying, some hungry for drama, some too indifferent to care. When she reached Omar's side, the billionaire gestured to the empty chair beside him. "Sit." The command was simple, but the weight behind it was crushing. A waitress did not sit at the table of kings. But tonight, nothing was following the rules. Sarah hesitated, then sat. The velvet cushion beneath her was softer than any bed she had slept on in years. She folded her hands in her lap, her back straight, her chin high despite the tremor in her chest. Omar leaned in, close enough for her to smell the faint trace of expensive cologne. "If you wish to stand among the powerful, then prove yourself. I will give you 3 questions. Answer them correctly, and I may forgive your insolence. Fail." He let the word hang, unfinished, like the sharp edge of a cliff. Sarah's throat tightened, but she nodded. "Ask." Omar smiled thinly. "First question." He gestured toward the chandelier overhead. "These crystals. Imported. Carved by hand. Do you know from where?" Sarah blinked. What kind of test was this? Yet she forced herself to think. Professor Collins had once taken her through Europe's history of glassmaking, the Venetian guilds, the migration of craft. She took a slow breath. "Bohemia," she said. "Czech Republic, famous for centuries." The table stirred. Omar raised an eyebrow. "Correct." Sarah exhaled quietly, her pulse still racing. "Second question," Omar continued, his tone harder. "Recite to me a proverb in Arabic, not one taught in schools, but one only the wise remember." Her mind raced. She had read dozens, maybe hundreds with her father. One surfaced, sharp and timely. She spoke clearly. "Man sabara zafira. He who is patient will triumph." Layla's lips curved in the faintest smile. Even the minister gave a small nod. Omar drummed his fingers on the table. Correct again. Sarah's palms were slick, but her face showed nothing. Third question. Omar's voice dropped lower, more dangerous. Tell me who you are. Not your name, not your job. Who are you, Sarah Collins? The hall stilled. Even the air seemed to stop moving. Sarah's chest rose and fell. Her instinct was to answer quickly, to shield herself with something polite, vague, forgettable. But deep inside, another part of her, the part that had carried her through hardship after hardship, rose to the surface. She met his gaze and said, voice steady, I am the daughter of a woman who lost everything, and the student of a man who gave me the world. I am not defined by the tray in my hands or the uniform on my back. I am defined by how I rise when I am pushed down. That is who I am. The silence after her words was deafening. Omar did not blink. For several seconds he stared into her eyes as though searching for cracks in her soul. But there were none. Finally, he leaned back and exhaled, a faint smile playing at his lips. You are reckless, he said, but not weak. The room released a collective breath it hadn't realized it was holding. Sarah's heart pounded, but for the first time that night, she felt something else stir within her chest, something dangerously close to triumph. For a long moment, no one spoke. The laughter, the arrogance, the shallow cruelty of the evening, all of it had been shattered by a single waitress who refused to bow to shame. Omar Al-Farid's hand still rested on his glass, but it no longer looked like a weapon of mockery. His sharp eyes softened, the weight of Sarah's words echoing deeper than he cared to admit. Around the table, powerful men and jeweled women shifted uneasily in their seats, realizing they had just witnessed something rare. Dignity standing tall in the simplest of uniforms. Clara's painted smile collapsed. She rose in a rustle of silk and stormed out, her heels striking the marble like hammers of defeat. The politician cleared his throat but said nothing, hiding his face behind his napkin. Even Layla, Omar's daughter, sat straighter, her gaze on Sarah filled with a quiet respect that hadn't been there before. Sarah didn't gloat. She didn't need to. She simply stood, her tray steady in her hand, her scar catching the golden glow like a medal earned in silence. Her heart still ached with her mother's struggle, but for one moment, she had proven something larger, that dignity cannot be bought, mocked, or diminished. Omar finally spoke, his voice low. You changed the game tonight. Sarah met his gaze, calm but unflinching. I didn't change anything, she said softly. I only reminded you that respect has no price tag. With that, she turned and walked away, her steps steady, her shadow stretching long across the marble floor as the chandeliers shimmered above. The entire hall remained frozen, not in scorn this time, but in silence, the kind that only follows truth. If this story touched you, take a moment, like, comment, and most of all, subscribe. Because stories like this remind us of something powerful, that even in the darkest rooms, dignity always shines the brightest.